Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we're going to get into a 101 where we discuss the importance of silliness in movies.
Let's dive...
Oh!
All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see /hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what, Pulcher?
Find good media, Sherlock.
You're damn right they can.
God damn
right. So just to
you got me trained at this point.
I know. I'm like, you're like
call and response.
Pavlovian. I cracked the beer and you're like places and spaces. So to end out our Taika Waititi festival, we thought that we would talk about the serious importance of silliness.
Yes.
The power that it has to really take an audience and make them feel certain things that I think a lot of times we haven't felt since we were kids, right? And I think to be like, here's a group of adults who have cameras and microphones and things, and actors, and they're going to make an audience of not all the time adults, but usually adults,
sure.
Feel like silly kids again. Right? Now, yeah. I think it's important right out of the gate to maybe talk about what silliness isn't. I think, although something like The Office does dip into silliness a lot of times, a lot of The Office and other more modern humor is a lot of times what I like to refer to as feel-bad funny.
For sure, yeah. And I'll go through the history of silliness a little bit later in the episode where we can kind of talk about it, but I don't really mention that part of it, but though I do think it's an important part of kind of that cringe humor.
Yeah,
right.
There's cringe humor. I think you have a lot of real like bathroom level humor that we see a lot of in.
Should I just go through that history right now?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Just
Let's
to
talk
get a
about
little
it.
bit of perspective of kind of what we're talking about.
And so we can kind of center in more. I agree.
So you know, this has been going on since the age of film, right?
Yep.
Silliness in comedy. You think of Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin in the 20s to probably the 40s or something like that.
Yeah, you go Laurel and Hardy, you go the Three Stooges.
You know, physical comedy for the most part, but still silly. And still to this day, it's timeless. It holds up. It's amazing because everyone loves to see someone get kicked in the balls, right? Like to some degree.
I mean, it's
to some degree, maybe not that every time, but like, you know, watching people get hurt. You know,
it's why America's funniest home videos was a sensation, is because Dad would get a football in the groin.
But comedy is tragedy that's happening to someone else, right? Like it's happening. And Chaplin had this great quote. And it is, life is a tragedy when you see it up close, but a comedy in a long short. So if you really go in and focus on a certain element of someone's life, or what they, you know, just concentrate on something that can be tragic and dramatic, that's where you get the feels and the cries and all that stuff, right?
Right.
But if you pull out and just look at the absurdity of life.
Yeah.
And just kind of the human experience and just the absurd, ridiculous parts of being a human and the human condition and all this stuff, you know, that's where you get to the silliness part of this, right?
So you're almost talking about like where they put the camera.
Kind of. And like, so let's go through some of it. Obviously, Chaplin and Buster Keaton in the 20s and 40s. I think Mel Brooks and Monty Python to a degree
definitely
did this in the 70s. National Lampoon's pretty much took over the 80s, where it was really the drug sex culture and the pervy rebelling, where Mel Brooks and you know, Monty Python were kind of snarky and smart. That's kind of your evolution into the drug sex culture. And then you know, something that I discovered just writing this history and researching it is a lot of this, obviously it's the roots of this are based in comedy, of course, silliness, but a lot of it evolves from sketch comedy. Right? Where you can really try anything. So you get the age of Adam Sandler, right? And his crew of people where you know, you get offshoots of things like Kids in the Hall and the State and Mr. Show and stuff like that in the 90s, with Adam Sandler and his crew really taking over Hollywood and that stuff.
Totally.
And then in the 2000s, there's a whole spring of things that happened with comedy. And it's all in line with silliness, but there's a variety now where we have the Will Ferrell crew and his SNL kind of upbringing of that kind of stuff. And you also have the Judd Apatow crew, where it's funny and it's kind of blue, but it's also dramatic at times as well.
Yeah.
And then you get in. You also have like the Jackass side of things, right? There's the silliness inside of something
watching
like
people
Jackass.
hurt themselves.
And then you have like Christopher Guest and stuff like that. And then even Wes Anderson, I think to a degree, he has lots of silliness in his movie.
That is so interesting, though.
And then the 2010s. I think it's evolved into stuff like Taika Waititi that we just did, and another one that I think you'll appreciate. I think stuff. It's the meaningful silliness, right? But the Duplass brothers, I think, do this to a great degree as well. You think of something like Jeff That Lives at Home. Mm-hmm. Amazing movie, but so silly. You know, the opening scene.
Him talking about signs. He's sitting on the toilet.
Well, he's shitting.
Yeah, yes. You just, boy, you kind of blew my mind with that whole arc of the history of this, because if you think about an Anchorman movie is front to back ridiculous the entire time. Even our character arcs and our characters learning things or having redemption don't matter because they're idiots, and that's part of the joy of it. And then when you think about something more like a 40-Year-Old Virgin, you're like, oh, it's really important for Act 3 to stop being silly so we can do what a movie's supposed to do, which is have all of these important lessons learned. And that a lot of movies, and it reminds me of something, again, going back to one of our early episodes of Wet Hot American Summer, the Wet Hot American Summer.
I definitely thought about that movie.
It plays with being a real movie, but it's more interested in its silliness. So the fact that our characters have arcs really doesn't matter at all anymore, right? Yeah. Like, none of that's actually important.
Like, you think of the scene in Talladega Nights where he thinks he can't walk and he stabs his leg with a knife. And it's just like ridiculous, right? But
it has the right trope, but then the silliness trumps the trope.
It's all about that the seriousness in the moment becoming funny out of context. And they know it's funny. And there's, if you focus in on just that scene of a guy who can't walk and stabs himself, and then his friend gets a second knife to help get the first knife out.
Exactly. Or another scene that's dealing with the same trope.
But they take that extremeness, right? They take that extremeness, and then they know it's funny, so they just play it up. But if you focus in on just that tragedy, but if you pull it out and just understand this is ridiculous and it's out of context, that's where the silliness kind of starts getting applied.
And I think that can be done throughout the subtext of the plot as well. I think there's two kinds. I think the first kind is on your face silliness, and the second one is that it's everything that's happening is ridiculous, and then there's a secondary layer. So another can't walk, can't use my legs scene I'm thinking of is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, where Steve Martin's character is in the wheelchair, and the deep subtext is that Michael Caine knows that he's faking, but he's like the great doctor who's going to make him walk again.
That's right.
So he's just whipping the shit out of his legs the whole time. And the third character can't know that he's feeling any of it. So he's like, did you feel that? And he's like, nope. But he's almost crying the whole time because we know he's whipping the shit out of his legs. So like those layers, again, work in that way.
I think just the layers of silliness and the things that you can kind of embrace with it are really fascinating, because it's like some people would think Michel Gondry is silly, right? But some people may think he's prolific, right? But you think about the concept of Eternal Sunshine, where you can wipe your brain because you had a bad relationship, right? Like, just the absurdity of something like that is still silliness, right?
But it somehow isn't silly because it's tinged with this deep sadness, heartbreak, and regret.
But we're growing back into that with the meaningful silliness.
I think one of the other important things that I thought about when we were talking about this idea, the first tentpole concept of like, what is silliness? And you went over a lot of examples.
Yeah.
The one I went to that I couldn't stop thinking about is obviously the entire movie of The Jerk. Own silliness. But this concept in and of itself
The Jerk
really spoke to me, which is he hates these cans scene. And the reason why is because not only do we first okay, silliness can be simple wordplay if that wordplay is not wit necessarily, but instead punches low. And I don't mean punches beneath the belt to like a lower class, but just that it becomes schoolyard stupidity.
Sure.
Right? That what it's saying is in and of itself kind of dumb. And so the fact that he's like, I'm finally in the phone book. Now things are really going to start happening to me.
Yeah.
Cut to Emmett Walsh being like, Navin Johnson, that sounds like a regular old son of a bitch, right?
Yeah.
Like that concept that all of a sudden there's a madman after him, pretty silly.
I think you can say a similar thing about something like Derek Zoolander, right?
Perfect.
He's
yes.
a perfect example of what you're talking about, where he just says you googly instead of eulogy because he's that stupid.
He's that stupid. But then the jerk ups the ante again because we introduce the madman character, which is dumb by its own merit. But then Navin doesn't know he's being shot at. He thinks there's something defective with the cans. Then he sees someone shooting at him, assumes that guy hates these cans. Mm-hmm. And then it turns into the world's slowest chase scene in a car that doesn't have any tires on it, right? But what makes it magic is that Emmett Walsh's character is as stupid as Navin Johnson is. Yeah. So that's like, you're doubling down, right?
Sure.
Because what happens is one of my favorite cinematic moments of all time, which is after this stupid, slow, no tire car chase scene, Navin manages to get away into the grounds of the carnival, and Emmett Walsh stops his car outside because he sees a sign that says, authorized carnival personnel only. And he's like, damn it. And so he doesn't follow him in, but he gets out of the car and yells to other people while pointing to Navin Johnson and says, he's not authorized carnival personnel. And to me, I was like, God, that's the cherry on the top of silliness, right?
Yeah.
That like, it's already, every part of this premise is stupid.
Yeah.
But then the fact that the chase scene ends,
yes,
because the guy who's trying to kill the other guy is not willing to break the rules of the carnival area because he is not authorized carnival personnel.
Amazing.
To me, I was like, that's silliness. Put that in a time capsule and bury it.
I think a lot of it has to do too with not being afraid of where your mind takes you. Over the course of a day, our minds go through a variety of thoughts for some reason or another, right?
Yes.
And so sometimes they're silly, sometimes they don't make any sense. Right? And you're just like, why did I just think that?
Yeah.
Like, is this like just a random, stupid thought that doesn't make sense? But if you allow your mind to go there and then reenact it,
it can be deeply funny.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty interesting. So, I think silliness is like, how would you say it remains ageless?
I think that too much bottom of the barrel comedy that we see out there, and I'm not talking about good stuff, and I'm not even really talking about romantic comedies, although maybe this happens to those occasionally. But when you rely too much upon tropes that can quickly be dated, or you're relying upon parody that's a flash in the pan, right? So again, you think about these awful like epic movie, date movie, like
the spoof stuff.
Yeah, the spoof stuff. Now, that's not to say that you can't do, to me, I would say something like Young Frankenstein is still perfect because the trope that it was aping is ageless, right? I think if you're aping an ageless trope, you're going to be just fine. I think if you're like, we did a series of 4 movies that are making fun of, the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. You're like, you got about 2 years.
Yep.
And then no one will know what you're talking about.
Things can be dated. I spoke about all the history and the different generations of comedy that we've kind of evolved through. And a lot of those were speaking to those generations, right? That's why it evolves. That's why it changes. But, back to what it's evolving into with the Duplass Waititi era of comedy, where it's a lot more meaningful. Back to the Eternal Sunshine concept, so people can relate to the heartbreak of losing someone, right?
Totally.
And so, but if you can make that funny and entertaining still, and you get into the silliness of something like that, that's when it starts to mean something, right?
Do you have a good example of something like that?
Outside of Eternal Sunshine?
Yeah.
Honestly, Jojo Rabbit is what we talked about last week.
Yeah.
Is a great example of this. I think it's honestly the most prime example of what we're kind of discussing here. Right?
So I have one that's kind of, was gonna say it's dumb, but that's the whole point. But
It's true.
When I thought about like a timeless scene that's funny and just stupid and silly that still works on me. It's been working on me since I was probably 9 years old and saw it for the first time. But it's a scene from the Pink Panther Strikes Back. And you know, Peter Sellers, obviously like incredible comedian. A lot of stuff he's done still remains very timeless, and a lot of it is still very silly. Even as something that you wouldn't initially think is a funny movie, like Lolita
Or Dr. Strangelove.
or Dr. Strangelove has these.
Lolita's funny.
Yeah, it's very funny. But him as Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther Strikes Back, there's a lot of very funny moments in this movie. But there's one in particular that is, you have the bad guy who's the old MI5 commissioner who now is like a supervillain who's living in like a castle, right? And he has his death ray to like get $1 billion. I mean, again, talk about tropes, talk about timeless tropes, right?
Yeah.
He has a death ray, and so like everybody needs to pay him, but Clouseau is going to infiltrate the castle. Mm-hmm. He has a horrible toothache, and Clouseau dresses up in this disguise to be the dentist for him. And so he has a fake nose and fake wrinkles and a fake chin and this big crazy Albert Einstein wig, and he's riding a bicycle, and he has his big thick glasses which you can't see through. So there's a lot of like good silliness around just him not being able to see. But then later on, he's going to go and pull the guy's tooth, and the laughing gas won't turn off, and so now they're both getting super high, but he's also sweating, and so all of his makeup starts to just melt and drip off of his face. But they're both so high that he's like, I think I'm hallucinating. Your nose looks like it's falling off. And he's like, and he's like trying to remold his nose. And I'm like, this came out in like 1970. And it's like, it still works today because I'm like, it's not dealing with anything that would be solved by a cell phone or a computer. Like, it's just, you put on a disguise,
Yeah.
and now you're both high and you're sweating, so it's melting off your face. And you go, put that in any era and it'll still work because it's so physical, but also you have good actors doing these parts. So you're like, it'll just keep working because it doesn't require more than like 5 working brain cells to be funny, right? Like, it was funny when I was 9. I literally just watched it researching this episode.
Sure, yeah.
And I laughed just as hard now because I'm like,
well, how
are you going to lose?
That's what this comes down to, right? Is everyone loves to laugh.
Yes.
And if you can, laughing is what's timeless, right?
Yep.
It's not the comedy itself, maybe necessarily, but and the executions may vary. But if you can get someone to laugh, you're getting to their heart, right?
Yep.
You're getting to what's important, or you hit something close to their heart that brings them joy.
And it's interesting now that we're like getting a little more cerebral with it. I'm like, why is a thing funny? And I'm like, I can't go there.
I mean,
I don't know why.
That's based on the person. It's just the person.
It is, but so many of us find the same things funny.
That's
right?
true. We may think Wet Hot American Summer is a hilarious, brilliant movie, which we do, but not everyone's gonna embrace that movie. Same with something like Kids in the Hall, Brain Candy, or those surrealistic movies that we're talking about.
Well, I remember hearing from a friend who lived in Mexico for years and years. He was like, wordplay humor down here in Mexico City, he was like, doesn't work. And he's like, because so much wordplay is language based.
Sure.
And so someone trying to be ironic or sarcastic, if there's a language barrier, people are like, I don't understand what's happening in this scene. Not to say that Spanish-speaking audiences don't have their own version of that, but they just might not translate from a Western audience, right?
Sure.
And I think that The Simpsons always made the biggest joke out of that. Every time that they had their Spanish-speaking television channel with the guy in the bee costume, "Hey, Dios mío," right? Like, where he's always got like a plunger on his ass or like water is spilled on him.
Yeah.
Because it was this idea of like, oh, you have to do over-the-top,
that's a good example,
bombastic, like physical humor in order to appeal to a large audience that might not be language-based. And I was always like, oh, that's so interesting. But it's completely true. It's why, again, guys like fucking Adam Sandler or even Oh, what's his loser friend?
David Spade? I don't know.
No, not David Spade. I know which loser friend. You could throw a dart and hit
Tim
5
Meadows,
of them. No, not Tim Meadows either.
Chris Farley? You better not say that.
No,
about
no,
Chris
no.
Farley.
The copy guy making copies. The fucking.
Rob Schneider.
Rob Schneider. Thank you.
Yes.
We just went through. We just went through a rogues gallery of losers. They
For the
hang out
record,
with
I
Adam
love
Sandler.
all of them. So
But still, no, I meant Schneider. So. Rob Schneider, I think I think Deuce Bigelow movies do really good overseas because they're like, oh, he's in a Speedo, and then he like
pimp.
yeah,
but he's
and
not really a
he
pimp.
flew into a wall, and now he has to take his pants off. Like you could translate the dialogue into whatever, and you're like, it's still Rob Schneider pretending to be, an idiot.
And to bring it full circle,
pretending.
Full circle, that's why Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin had lives that big, or careers that big.
Completely. Once they were like, wait, I can do this on film?
It's true. And it's why big blockbusters work well in other countries as well, because you get that. There's no language to action, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's what the people are saying it's probably less important, but that's why in China, all the Marvel movies do amazing.
Dude, listen,
right?
as a kid, I remember seeing a version of Rambo when I was staying with my dad in Istanbul. And it was like, first of all, it was unfortunate because the guy who overdubbed Sly had a voice about this range. So every time he'd turn and look at the camera and be like, oh, we better go. But then they cut out. There's a whole separate story in Rambo, First Blood Part 2. There's a whole separate storyline with like the woman that they capture, and they kind of have like a pseudo romantic kind of relationship. There's some sexual tension. All cut out. All of that was. She was gone. She wasn't in the movie. The movie was like almost an hour long because they cut out like 35 minutes of subtext, and they're like, all anybody wants to see is Sly Stallone blow up some helicopters. And so they
as a director, that would piss me off, but I get it, I guess, to a degree.
He's still got his shekels.
Oh,
anyway.
I'm sure he's doing fine.
So one of the other interesting things that this level of comedy, this slapstick silliness of comedy, allows movies to do is to tackle, again, with Jojo Rabbit, tackle some otherwise very touchy subjects.
Sure.
Right?
But if you can get people to laugh, they will let you get away with that much more, right?
So one thing I'm thinking of with that, when we were kind of discussing that, is I was thinking about Mel Brooks. Obviously, Mel Brooks does this all the time, but specifically the producers, right? The idea of, and I'm not talking about the Nathan Lane remake thing. I mean the original with Gene Wilder. That thing's incredible.
Yeah.
But this idea of like, what's the worst play that you could make, and they come up with Springtime for Hitler.
That's right.
Just the groovy hippie Hitler in it, and then all of the guys in jackboots as line go-go dancers. Where the camera's looking down from above and they're all Springtime for Hitler, and they're doing a dance number and they're in the shape of a swastika. Just like, that is so, like, what a way to cut down an enemy that otherwise is so terrifying and untouchable than to put them into a fucking musical, right? And then surround it with a storyline that makes sense why the musical exists. Like, this is the most abhorrent, awful thing we could do. And then everybody loves it because why wouldn't you love Springtime for Hitler?
It's catchy.
It's catchy as hell. But do you have any thoughts around that kind of an idea, that phenomenon?
No, I love that you're able to bring Brooks in there. You know, he kind of leans into the spoof part of things too later in his career, which we were kind of talking about. Spaceballs, even Young Frankenstein.
Blazing Saddles, does
all
it
that
too.
stuff. So like, he leaned into that and almost kind of created that, along with National Lampoon, like doing stuff like Airplane, that kind of stuff.
Completely.
Where the silliness in those movies.
God, I didn't even think about Airplane.
But like,
so
the
silly.
Kentucky Fried Movie, that kind of stuff, where really was influenced by that drug sex culture a lot more, like very much like National Lampoons and all those guys, but like ridiculous, silly, like completely silly. But no way Kentucky Fried Movie could be made today. It would be a TV show.
No, it couldn't be made today, although I will say, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of my examples was the send-up of the KKK in Blazing Saddles, where they're, your hands, Marshall, they're so... I told him to wash his hands after the last cross-burning, right? And like, that whole sequence is really funny. The fact that they have a nice day, with a smiley face on the back of the KKK robes.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I thought the same thing. I was like, that's couched in a particular time and place, though.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, a current or roughly current movie that did that, Django Unchained, where we have this great moment where all of them have, you know, they got Don Johnson there and they got Jonah Hill, and they all have their hoods.
Hill?
Yeah, Jonah Hill's there.
That's
and
right.
they all got their hoods on and they're on their horses.
He's in
And I
that.
can't see a goddamn thing out of this, man. Well, it's not my fault. My wife cut all the holes. And he's like, well, I could have cut my own holes. He's like, I got to take this thing off. I can't breathe in it. Right? Like, and they do an amazing, Tarantino does an amazing send up that's incredibly silly in a movie that, like, yeah, is bombastic and wild, but not very silly. But that sequence with the KKK, I was like,
Totally
you could have
silly.
pulled that right out of Blazing Saddles.
Totally. That's
Beautiful, beautiful, silly moment that still is a great send up, modern send up of the KKK.
like Tarantino likes to try to be funny in his movies, but like I agree, that's something that like is totally out of Blazing
Yeah, he's
Saddles.
like, oh, now I tried to make my eye holes bigger too, and I ruined one of them. Anybody bring any more bags? And they're like, why the hell would we have brought more bags? Like, it's just really, really funny in a movie that, yeah,
Interesting.
otherwise is not like that. But I thought, okay, and he really took from that same, you know, page of the book and
Yeah.
used it in this movie to be like, okay, I'm going to have a whole crew of KKK dudes. This is fucked up. I even have to film this, but it's got to be in the movie. What do I do?
Huh.
And he puts a line of dialogue that could have come right out of Blazing
Fantastic
Saddles.
conversation.
Yeah.
Like really cool and fun to dive into just the importance of silliness, and it truly is important for us as moviegoers, but also just like to watch how it changes over time. Really interesting.
And also how it stays the same.
But yeah, how
Yeah.
it's still timeless to some degree, and
Yeah.
and again, it comes down to laughter. But thank you, everyone. That is our 1-on-1 for this week: the importance of silliness. Next week, we're going to be starting a new festival. We'll probably throw some scenes in there.
Yep.
We got Children of Men coming up, so we'll get into that stuff. But please like and subscribe if you like what you see /hear.
We'll see you guys next week.
Spaces and places, right?
Spaces and all them spaces and places.
All right, thanks everyone.
All right. Bye, you guys.